You're listening to Skills World Live with Tom Bewick. News, views and interviews in association with FE News. Hello, I'm Tom Bewick and welcome to Skills World Live. On this day, the 4th of June in 1738, Prince George of Great Britain and the House of Hanover was born at Windsor Castle. He would go on in popular history to be known as the Mad King George III that lost Britain's American colonies. And talking of our wonderful cousins in the United States, today is also the 101st anniversary in 1919 of the US Senate finally granting women the right to vote. It would take, of course, a further 9 years in the UK before we'd see all working people, men and women, being treated equally at the ballot box. And talking of power women, just in case she's listening into Skills World Live this evening, I'd like to wish the American actress Angelina Jolie a very happy 45th birthday. Born in 1971, I'm just a tad older than Angelina. Not that you'd think that if you heard the way my kids often speak to me. Tell them to get off the Wi-Fi so I have enough bandwidth to broadcast this show, and I get a sarcastic retort. Okay, boomer, they say. I'm pretty sure that is not a term of endearment coming from my offspring. I wouldn't even mind. Technically, I'm not even a boomer. I'm Generation X. Perhaps it's my kids and the millennials' generation's revenge for being so often derided in our popular culture as snowflakes. Stay tuned, folks, for the only online community radio show connecting the world of FE. You're listening to Skills World Live with Tom Bewick. On tonight's programme, we're exploring an angle of the COVID-19 crisis that is perhaps too often overlooked by the mainstream media. I'm referring to the issue of how we look after the safety, mental health and well-being of staff and students as educational settings start to tentatively reopen. It comes at a time when one published academic study has found that up to 25% of students have experienced anxiety and or depression during the lockdown. Meanwhile, a recent survey by Young Minds found that 83% of their youth respondents agreed that pre-existing mental health conditions were exacerbated by the crisis, mainly due to the impact of school and college closures, the loss of routine, and the restrictions placed on physically mixing with friends. Our editor, Gavin O'Mara, and the Skills World Live team have put together a fantastic lineup of guests for me to talk to this evening about this really important topic. After the news, we'll be checking in with the boss of the Skills and Education Group, Paul Eeles. He's back on the show and is himself a mental health awareness champion within his awarding body. He'll be joined in conversation by the well-known Apprentice guru and former Barclays Bank HR Director of Early Careers, Mike Thompson. In the middle segment of the show, we'll be progressing the debate with two sector leaders, Ian Pryce, the Chief Executive of Bedford College, and Alan Woods, the boss of the awarding charity VTCT. And not forgetting, of course, it is Thursday, because regular listeners to this show know that can only mean one thing. Hashtag stand up for skills. That's right, folks. Kirstie Donnelly of City and Guilds Group fame is back on her campaign soapbox as she brings not one, but two wonderful guests into a regular weekly slot. But first, let's find out what's been making the news headlines in your skills world this evening. Prime Minister Boris Johnson has reiterated his support for the English apprenticeship programme, saying it was important to guarantee young people a place. Speaking to journalists in Downing Street last night, the PM said that young people were at the highest risk of losing their jobs because of the pandemic, so it was vital government guaranteed apprenticeships for them. The chair of the House of Commons Education Select Committee, Robert Halfon, welcomed the move, as has the Apprenticeships Minister, Gillian Keegan, who told this programme earlier today that the Department for Education was in the process of working up options and proposals for the future of the apprenticeship model in England. While not explicitly defining an apprenticeship guarantee, Mrs Keegan said that both she and the Prime Minister were on the same page when it came to opening up high quality and skilled routes into the workplace. You can listen to an extended interview with England's Apprenticeship Minister on tomorrow's night's programme. In other news, the Education and Skills Funding Agency has revealed who has obtained the most money from England's £2.4 billion apprenticeship levy pot. Around 2% of firms in the country with payrolls in excess of £3 million are liable for the payroll tax brought in by the Conservative government in 2017. In return, firms can get their money back via digital accounts, which is a kind of virtual currency to purchase the training they require for their apprenticeships from an approved list of FE providers. The ESFA data shows that the private provider Lifetime Training Limited made the most money from levy-paying employers last year, securing over £50 million in funds. The highest paid FE college was Sheffield College, in 28th place overall, winning an employer levy allocation of £3.8 million. And finally, an A-level student, Erin Sanderson from Neath College, who is also the Deputy Youth Mayor of Neath Port Talbot in Wales, has been selected to become a mental health ambassador for young people across the county borough. Erin, aged 17, was chosen for the role by Inspirational Futures, an organisation set up by teachers to offer support on well-being and mindfulness to pupils, parents and other teaching staff. That's all your Skills World News from fenews.co.uk. Contact us at Skills World Live. Email skillsworld@fenews.co.uk. Follow us on Twitter @Tom Bewick, @FENews. Use the hashtag SkillsWorld. Call us on 02032 900 111. That's 02032 900 111. That's Castizo, a track called Tremor. It's quite a banger to get tonight's proceedings off the ground. And indeed, to kick off tonight's big debate about how should we secure the mental health and well-being of staff and students post the pandemic. I'm delighted to be joined by Paul Eeles, Chief Executive of the Skills and Education Group, and of course also the Chairman of the Federation of Awarding Bodies. Good evening, Paul.
Good evening, Tom.
And joining us in this three-way debate this evening, we've got Mike Thompson, who's Managing Partner at Gen Healthy Minds, a programme that supports apprentices and graduates develop their mental well-being and performance. Good evening, Mike.
Hi, good evening.
Thanks to you both for joining us. Paul, let's start with you. Your group of organisations employs a lot of people and supports via centres thousands of learners. What's your reflections on the main theme of tonight's discussion? How do we support the sector's long-term well-being?
That's a really good question, actually, Tom, and I think it's a really important debate that we're having tonight. Yeah. We're 12, 13 weeks into lockdown. Part of what the Skills and Education Group does, a big part of it, is it supports the development of the skills workforce. Yeah. And just looking at our website online and our events, over 50% of that is focused on well-being, mental health, how to manage mental health in a post-COVID-19. I think we all ought not to underestimate the stress that everybody has been through over the last 12 weeks or so. Whether you're a senior in the organisation or whether you're junior in the organisation, whether you're a learner, whoever you are, whatever you do, our worlds have been turned upside down, and I don't think any of us can underestimate the impact that has had on how we live and work.
Indeed, and you could say also we've gone through various stages as well of this crisis. I think at the outset, people probably felt more optimistic that it would be short, sharp lockdown. We'd get on top of the curve, and then things would just get back to normal quite quickly afterwards. But I think everybody now just knows that we're going to have to coexist, aren't we, with this virus for quite some time, and that's going to mean lots of restrictions on our daily lives.
Absolutely, and as we get used to that reality, and our hopes and dreams and aspirations for students, for learners, for staff may well change quite significantly, and that's something we've got to deal with.
Yeah. Mike, you swapped the corporate life not so long ago to lead the work of Gen Healthy Minds. Do you think there's anything unique about this crisis that's having an impact on the well-being of apprentices compared to, say, the global financial crisis back in 2008?
Yes, most definitely. I think if you look at well-being amongst apprentices and young people generally entering the workforce, there has been a rise in mental health issues pretty consistently, even well before COVID and the lockdown. So this isn't a new issue that the sector is having to face. This is something I, as an employer, when I used to run the Barclays apprenticeship scheme, we were seeing mental health issues growing year on year, and that's down to a number of reasons. One is obviously the increasing stress and pressure of the workplace, and particularly if you're in an apprenticeship where you're juggling work and study and a big change in your life, moving into work. Those are things that put a lot of pressure on young people. But I think just generally society and some of the challenges young people are facing within society are growing, and that is resulting in more people facing mental health issues. What COVID has done is really exacerbated that. It's thrown people into situations that were already tough. It was tough in the workplace anyway. Yeah. Now it's really, really hard because people are socially isolated. As humans, we're not meant to be socially isolated. We're supposed to see other people and have contact and all the rest of it. So I think it is a lot worse than you would have seen previously, but it isn't a new issue. COVID is exacerbating it, and it means that employers and providers have to put a huge amount of focus and attention in the short term on making sure people stay well and look after themselves. Yeah.
We know obviously from, indeed I quoted some of these surveys earlier, that the impact, particularly on young people of the lockdown, when they're so used to, obviously they socially mix online, so that's continued, but obviously, young people like to go out and physically meet. All of our restaurants and bars, of course, have been closed down for the last 12 weeks, apart from takeaway services. So, it is a very different type of crisis, isn't it? And I suspect we'll still for some months and even years to come, we'll be playing out the exact impact this has had on the psychology and the mindset. What do you think, Paul?
I think it's very. You talked about the global crisis 10 years ago, and I think the difference is you're a lot younger than I thought you were. You're a lot younger than I am. I thought we were about the same age.
I'm older than Angelina Jolie, though, unfortunately.
Absolutely. I remember being at school in the 80s, and my generation, I can remember people not having hope about leaving school and getting a job. And I think we're in very much danger of being in that environment. Lots of young people will have wanted to go and do an apprenticeship this year, and the growth of apprenticeships, that's going to not be there. And I think we're very close to having a generation that doesn't really have the same hope and aspiration that it had just 12 weeks ago. And I think we've got to do all we can to help and support that generation in particular as they find their way through this, and to the programs that will enable them to progress into the future. That I think is a real challenge. It
is a real challenge, and indeed the whole phrase lost generation, I think, was coined as a result of that experience of people growing up in the 1980s. And actually, Paul, that's a very helpful segue there to a question I wanted to ask Mike, particularly given his background at Barclays, running a very high profile apprenticeship program, and indeed he's supporting apprentices now. Mike, I mean, you would have probably got as excited as other people have in the sector over the last 24 hours regarding Boris Johnson's comments to journalists in Downing Street last night about guaranteeing apprenticeships. I mean, just building on Paul's point there about how we avoid a lost generation of young people, would you support some kind of guarantee for young people of an apprenticeship?
I think it's a very interesting concept, and what this government has had to do is some pretty radical. It's had to do some pretty radical things to prop up the economy, and I would argue it has to do some pretty radical things to prop up young people's aspirations. I think the great point that was made a moment ago about the threat of a lost generation. Unless we do something radical, Paul's absolutely right. There will be. I mean, this year it's inevitable we will see significantly less people hiring apprentices. That's a given, really, because employers have had such a big financial impact on their profit and loss. They will be looking at how they cut costs. They will be reducing their recruitment. They'll be letting people go almost certainly as well. There'll be redundancies. It'll be pretty bleak this year. So finding a way of almost guaranteeing people an opportunity, whether the government fund that, and underpin it and underwrite it as it's underwritten the economy over the last 10 weeks, 12 weeks. There's got to be something radical. I think we're going to be very careful, though, because we have moved to an employer-driven system, and employers now are much more bought into apprenticeships than they were 5-10 years ago. Yeah. And we can't move away to a situation where government dictates to employers you have to recruit this person, even though they don't want to. And that's my worry about this type of guarantee. But I think we need to do something radical. Otherwise, I think you're right, there will be this lost generation.
Yeah, I think there is an understanding about that terminology, guarantee. I thought it was very interesting. Obviously, we're going to play this interview on the show tomorrow, but just a sneaky preview, talking to Gillian Keegan, the apprenticeships minister, earlier on today. I mean, she stepped back, I think, from wholeheartedly endorsing the idea of absolutely guaranteeing everyone an apprenticeship. I kind of got the impression that what the department's looking at is, how do you sort of leverage the incentives, the financial incentives that are there in the system? How do you improve those to at least, help employers make change behaviour perhaps, but also help employers make decisions around investing in young people for the long term? I mean, Paul, what's your reflections on the youth guarantee then as one way of supporting their well-being?
I think there is a youth guarantee. I think that is important. I think my start point is that, yes, there are those young people that are going to join apprenticeships in the future. I think my real immediate concern is those apprentices that are on programme right now, that are furloughed, that we need to guarantee that there is resource in place for them to continue to the end of their programme. I am really concerned that we have a whole generation of current apprentices that are made redundant, that don't get to finish their programme, and don't get their qualification. And that will be a real tragedy. And I think we need to do something around there and then work from there. The government have done some great things in terms of furlough. They've supported the economy and employers. They just need to do a little bit more here to actually ensure that apprentices that are on programme are able to continue.
I think that's a really strong point, actually, because you're right. There's two kind of separate issues here. There's the 480,000 apprentices that are on programme right now that are, frankly, a lot of them at risk. I think, Mike, as you were also indicating, they're at risk of redundancy. And then there's the kind of future of the apprenticeship programme within, obviously, a changed post sort of COVID-19 economy, where 12 weeks ago we were talking about skills shortages. Arguably now we're going to be talking about labour surpluses. So, the whole kind of terms of the debate to some extent has changed, although some of those underlying problems will be with us for a long time to come. Now, look, in the closing sort of couple of minutes I've got this segment, I did just want to reflect, because obviously we talked a lot about the impact of mental health and well-being on young people. But what about, obviously, the impact of well-being for leaders that have had to step up during this crisis? You're both of you, leading high-profile organisations. You've had long and distinguished careers in the learning and skills sector. You've probably had to make some really difficult decisions over the last few weeks. Do you think leaders get the right kind of support that they need through this crisis as well, Mike? The
short answer is no, I don't think they do.
I thought you might say that.
I mean, I'm not talking about me personally. My business has been really significantly impacted in the sense that we were delivering all face-to-face workshops and training, and that's all disappeared out the window, and we've had to adapt, and that's been quite challenging for us, and that's put a lot of pressure and stress on the team. But we can manage that. It's people who are working in these bigger organisations where they're managing huge numbers of people. They're under huge pressure day in, day out. And interesting enough, we've been asked to work with a number of those teams, and they're almost under as much, if not more, stress than the young people. The young people, in many ways, are having a lot of effort directed towards them by their employers. It's been great to see, but the managers are less so. I think people assume if you're a bit more long in the tooth, you can deal with these things, but the reality is everybody suffers, and everybody needs help. And of course, it goes without saying, obviously, the older you are, the more likely you are to have more commitments, dependents, mortgages, all the things that potentially are going to keep you awake at night if you're fearing for your job and you can no longer meet those commitments. Paul, final word to you then. What's your reflections on that? I mean, is there enough support around the sector generally in terms of our sector leaders? Because, again, these things affect people in different ways, don't they?
They do. I went on a mental health first aid course about 3 weeks before the pandemic hit. And I sent out resources that I'd got to anyone and everybody I knew. And I think we all go through different phases, don't we, as leaders? If you're a leader, you're in the top job and you're paid to do the job. That doesn't mean to say that you don't have tough days, and we've all had tough days. I'm very fortunate. I've got some great board members, and chair and colleagues around the sector that have provided support, and hopefully I've provided support too. I think we also to recognise that we are struggling sometimes, and enable people to come alongside us, and as fellow leaders come alongside each other and stop and ask each other if we're okay. And I think it's okay to be honest as leaders, because I think in being honest, we can enable other people that work for us to actually recognise that they don't have to be perfect all the time. We're facing unprecedented decisions to make, and we can't get them all right all the time. And we can't be perfect all the time. So I think we just need to seek the kind of advice, support from each other, and connect and give each other and ourselves the space.
Well, if there's one thing about the subject of mental health and well-being these days, is it's not quite the stigmatised discussion topic it was even just a decade ago, particularly when you've got the heir to the throne, Prince William, even happy to talk about it as well. Paul, Eeles, Mike, Thompson, thanks so much for joining the show and sharing your thoughts with us on this really important topic this evening. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Tom. It's a pleasure. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye. You're listening to Skills World Live with Tom Bewick. Rescue your mind. Rather neat connection there to tonight's topic. That's by Klinger. They've often appeared on this radio show. Of course, all our tracks selected from epidemicsound.com. Just head over to there if you want to see the tracks that we're playing. Now, I'm delighted to continue tonight's discussion with Ian Pryce, CBE, who's the Chief Executive of Bedford College, and Alan Woods, OBE, who's the Chief Executive of VTCT, and of course, a FAB board member. Good evening to you both.
Hi, Tom.
Hi, Tom.
Hi. Ian, as a leader of a college that's about to reopen on the 15th of June, I know you've been open anyway for vulnerable students, but what kind of measures have you had to put in place to assure students and staff of their safety?
Really, we've concentrated on bringing together staff across the group. So we have a COVID team, sort of a mini COBRA, really, inside the college. And I suppose what we've been focusing on in immediate terms has been to make sure we've got the cleaning right. So we've increased the cleaning, make sure if we do need any PPE that we've got that. And really just focusing on the timetabling aspects and reducing the numbers of people who are going to be on campus at any one time, trying to mirror what schools are doing really with those bubbles, the idea being that if anything does happen, then hopefully it only affects a relatively small number of people. And we're beginning that exercise already for September as well, because we've only got a few weeks left of term. So in terms of students on the ground for the next few weeks, it's largely the first year of our sixth form people. So probably about, no more than 200 students out of when typically we have 6,000 students across our sites in a year.
Yeah.
Of that age group.
Tell us more about just how these bubbles operate. I mean, my partner works part-time at a school and she came back talking about the bubbles today. I mean, it sounds like obviously every single educational setting and establishment will have its very own unique geography, won't it? So, you have to really think about how you do that.
It is, and it's much harder. I mean, obviously in a school where a class tends to have a teacher, one of the big attractions of FE and college life is that you can be doing one course with 20 people that you're going to get to know well, but you're also going to be taught by a group of teachers. And that's, I think we're just acutely aware of that, if say 3 or 4 teachers are working with one group and they had to go off in isolation, that excludes them teaching other groups as well. Yeah. So we can't do what the schools are doing, but I think we can try to, limit as much as possible the interplay between all staff and all students. And that's really what we're focusing on. But obviously the best people to do that are the managers and the staff closest to the action, closest to the students.
Yeah. Alan, VTCT operates a lot internationally. I mean, how has the pandemic affected how you relate to supporting your learners and those centre staff globally?
Yeah, thanks, Tom. It's a really great question. I mean, what we're seeing worldwide, of course, is that the lockdown measures are different in different countries, and countries are bringing back students and opening up facilities at different rates. And we're also having that, of course, within the United Kingdom, where the 4 national governments are doing things at slightly different speeds. Yeah. And I think one of the challenges that all of us that are operating within the skills ecosystem have is, being able to respond to those changes and in a way which makes sense for the providers, whether that's the college or the private training providers, and also for our staff. So, for a lot of us that are in the awarding organisation sector, the work that we've been doing on the emergency framework with Ofqual for the changes that they are putting in whilst the pandemic is in operation actually then rolls out worldwide in effect, because we're having to think about those regulated qualifications and how they're being delivered in an international context. So sometimes the decisions that we're making here in England actually have a wider impact worldwide.
Indeed, and probably not many people listening to this even realise that if you're delivering regulated qualifications, Ofqual regulated qualifications in England, and you deliver them somewhere else in the world, they're still covered by the same regulations. So I could imagine with those other jurisdictions not necessarily aligning with the same kinds of COVID secure type rules, then that must be, frankly, a bit of a nightmare. Now, Ian, as a college leader, obviously, we talked there a bit about how you're making your college campuses and other learning environments safe. What's your reflections, though, on the impact on the student population and indeed on your staff of some of the potential psychological and mental health impacts? I mean, how is a college like Bedford prepared to support students and staff in that scenario as well?
It's worked a lot better than I think a lot of us expected. So we're making a lot of contact with the students. The tutors are making regular contact and actually finding, intriguingly, that we can make contact more easily, and students almost like the immediacy of things like Teams and phone calls.
Yeah.
And it's even to the point where we're now rethinking whether had we known this, whether we would have structured our jobs slightly differently, some of the student support jobs. So that's been an interesting finding. And I think the same with staff, actually. One of the things I feared, not being able to see staff on a sort of daily basis and just say hello, was whether that emotional attachment you need to a college would disappear. But actually, what we're getting back is that people feel more trusted. They feel more attached. I don't think it's just the crisis that's doing that. But some people are really thriving. They're enjoying, they can get on with work with no interruptions. But others are finding that social dimension just very difficult. So finding that balance of how many team meetings can we do, Microsoft team meetings, are worthwhile just to keep in touch with people without overwhelming them. Has been something we've had to experiment with, I think.
Yeah, I think that's a really insightful point from the point of view of, this is obviously a generation, we talk about younger people, a lot more, frankly, digitally savvy than we are, although I think there are a lot of people, again, listening to this who've probably had to get quite digitally savvy over the last few weeks as they have transferred a lot of those physical meetings to Zoom, Microsoft Teams. I mean, the list is endless in terms of the potential platforms that you can work on. I mean, Alan, again, with your kind of international context, I mean, to what extent does digital potentially help you out of some of the challenges that you're going to face trying to work across borders? I mean, I've seen awarding organisations that have got, for example, online marking systems in the cloud, for example, which doesn't obviously then rely on moving paper examination scripts across borders and all that sort of stuff. I mean, is that something that VTCT is looking at as well, or perhaps you already do? I don't know.
Well, I mean, I think a lot of us are along that line already, but I think what the pandemic has done, Tom, is to shift us now completely over the line, and we are all, I'm sure, thinking about how we both teach, which is one thing, and how we encourage learning, which I think is different in a digital world, and making sure that we have the right staff that enable us to support teaching and learning, and also have the right facilities to support that. So, I mean, for our qualifications, which in some of our core sectors around hairdressing and beauty, we use complete online learning systems for that, which are pretty much world class. But I think the next stage is this move over to assessment programs and techniques which are going to use online assessment as the kind of one of the ways in which we'll get through this, because it's invariably, as you were saying at the top of the show, that this isn't just going to be something which we're going to just come back out of before the end of the year. It's going to be something which is going to be with us for some time. So I really do think that this move to digital assessment and digital teaching, and importantly, as I say, this difference between teaching and learning, is something which is going to be at the forefront of all sectoral leader minds over these next few months.
It certainly is. And I'm so glad you said hairdressing and beauty there, because I tell you what, if there's one thing I've missed about my own well-being, it's not being able to have a haircut and a Turkish shave. And I've got the partner as well, sort of moaning about the nasal hairs that appear to be getting out of control. So, I'm hoping for the hairdressers to be open very, very soon, hopefully.
And just on a serious point there, Tom, as well, that some of the work that barbers do in terms of mental health for men in particular, there was 6,500 suicides in the UK in 2018. Wow. And a lot of work that we've been doing with barbers and the Lions Barber Collective in particular is, just getting men to talk about when they have mental health issues. And as Paul was saying earlier when you were interviewing him, it's okay to fail. And I think the pressures that we all have as sectoral leaders, right from, people that are middle management right to the top in terms of leadership in lockdown is something which is really important.
Yeah, indeed. Well, I think a lot of people say that they tell their barbers and hairdressers nearly all their secrets. So they are very much at the front line of those types of conversations. Now, look, as sector leaders, I just do want to get also a quick take, because I think it does relate to how we support, again, particularly young people through this crisis. We don't want to go back to the 80s and another lost generation. Ian, what's your reflections on Boris Johnson's comments in Downing Street last night about guaranteeing apprenticeships? Do you think that will happen? And if it does, what form would you like to see that happen?
I find it difficult to see how it can happen,
right.
If I'm honest. And I'm not a big fan of guarantees like that for two reasons. I tend to concentrate not on the form of your education, but what you're actually learning. For us, the big thing is to progress. If we can get everybody up to level 3, they never have to really worry about employment for the rest of their lives. It doesn't matter on your subject. Our stats are very, very secure on that. The higher the level, the happier you are, the wealthier you are, you live longer, all of those things. So I'd rather focus on that rather than should it be full-time or apprenticeship. I think the other things that I just worry slightly about are a lot of 16-year-olds, when they say they want an apprenticeship, what they really mean is they don't enjoy school. And actually, they don't realise that employers are actually a less forgiving place than schools. So they're not really ready for work. So I think if you guaranteed that would go against some of the advice and guidance we might give that young person to maybe get a bit more mature and do a full-time course for another couple of years. And the only people that can guarantee it is the state, unless they're going to subsidise the wages. So I think that sends a signal that public sector jobs are not as are easier, and somehow you don't need to be as good to do them. So I think it can actually backfire in terms of the perception of the public sector.
I think that's a good term, actually, backfire. I mean, Alan, guarantees. It's a problematic phrase. It's a great slogan, of course, but it's quite problematic, isn't it?
Yeah, I think it can be problematic for exactly those points that Ian was making. I mean, unless it is in the public sector, as I know that you've been saying, Tom. I mean, how can you actually guarantee anything? An apprenticeship is supposed to be, from all the work that Frank McLaughlin has done, when he was running the Commission for Adult Vocational Teaching and Learning. It's about a direct line of sight to a job.
And a job that's got to exist. And
you've got to engage employers. Otherwise, we're just going to be creating supply side solutions, which in the end, will get back to some of the worst excesses of train to gain, and all the advances that we've made, I think, in apprenticeship development with the new standards and the reforms that have happened in apprenticeships could be quite easily lost by just stimulating the supply side. We've got to get employers working with us, both providers and assessment organisations, to actually ensure that there are real proper jobs for people to go into, and that quality is maintained throughout.
Well, I hope senior officials and ministers, I know they listen to the show. Indeed, we've got Robert Haltham, chair of the Education Select Committee, coming on the show next Thursday to talk about this idea of an apprenticeship guarantee. It's something he's obviously pushing very, very strongly. But great to get those wise words there from two sector leaders. Ian Pryce, Chief Executive of Bedford College. Alan Woods, Chief Executive of VTCT. Thanks for coming on the show this evening.
Thanks for the invitation.
Thanks, appreciate it.
You're listening to Skills World Live with Tom Bewick. That's We Can Be Fearless by Thomas Skiedelberg. Now, talking of someone who's absolutely fearless, it's that time of the evening when we hand over to that seasoned skills campaigner, Kirstie Donnelly. Good evening, Kirstie.
Hello, Tom. Are you ever going to run out of strap lines for me?
Well, it's indeed, it's just the nature, isn't it, of being a DJ impresario. This is how I now pass my time of day, thinking up for segues and strap lines for Kirstie Donnelly. Now, Kirstie, before you start your segment, can you just give me your kind of reaction to the big news over the last 24 hours? Obviously, everybody's getting very excited about this idea of an apprenticeship guarantee that the Prime Minister, I think he used the word guarantee twice in his response to the Sun journalist in Downing Street last night. What's your thoughts?
Well, look, it's great that we've got the Prime Minister talking about apprenticeships and talking about the importance of skills, because I think the very reason I'm on this show every week, Tom, as you know, is to stand up for skills, because right at the beginning of the COVID crisis, we were talking about education in its purest sense, but we weren't talking about the broader vocational skills market and apprenticeships. So on one level, I'm delighted. I think the very fact that's going to be front and centre of the Prime Minister and the Skills Minister and government officials' minds is great. I think, though, as the conversation we were just having with Ian and Alan, I think we need to be very careful that we don't lose the last 7 years that have been put into the apprenticeship system we've now got. And I think the job guarantee, this has got to be about an apprenticeship that leads to a job. And I think for me, it's got to be employer-led. It's got to genuinely be about the employer demand, not the supply side. So I think that's probably my only note of cautiousness in what is still a pretty optimistic statement that's been made. Yeah,
I agree. I think we do need to proceed with some caution and really work out what that means in practice. Anyway, I'm going to switch my microphone off now, and it's over to you.
Great. Fantastic. Thanks very much, Tom. Well, this evening I'm actually joined by two guests, so we're going to be very ambitious. One of them is Stella Ziolkowski, and Stella is a director for the National Day Nurseries Association. And I'm also joined by Emily Tang, an apprentice working at the Co-op. Nurseries has been doing a fantastic job supporting those key workers by providing their all-important childcare. And tonight the focus is on another important sector, which is the childcare sector. So as we continue to think about what we need to do when we stand up for skills across a broad range of sectors, I think childcare is one that we do need to shine a light on. And before I bring my guests on, Stella and Emily, just to sort of give a bit of context, really. According to the last statistics, at the start of 2020, there were more than 23,000 daycare centres or nurseries and nearly 40,000 registered childminders operating in England alone. And yet, now 1 in 4 of those childcare providers believe they will not survive the year, and only 40% of parents are expected to send their children back to nurseries after the pandemic, potentially leaving the sector at risk of collapse. So set against that context, Stella, if I may come to you first. I mean, what's your view on that kind of stark reality that you're now facing in this sector?
Yeah. We've just been recently doing some research with our members, looking at return, and very few parents have got the confidence to start sending the children back to nursery. They're looking at around 35% occupancy, when levels of occupancy are normally between sort of 75 to 85, 90%. So, demand's really low, and there is a really big concern for the sector in terms of their sustainability and survival. Few are thinking that they're going to be closing, but obviously, whilst the furlough schemes, they're supporting them. They've got that sort of that safety net, but there's some real big concerns.
No, absolutely. And I know from sort of colleagues that I work with in City and Guilds how often, childcare places are almost like so hard to get. And yet, as you just said, that level of drop in occupancy really tells a very stark story. And of course, it isn't right now, it's probably about nervousness, as you say. But of course, as we see potentially the high numbers of unemployment, well, not potentially, we are going to see high numbers of unemployment. That, of course, is going to have an even longer term impact, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, I mean, what would you like to see happen? I mean, if you were speaking to the government right now and employers even, what would you like to see happen to try and safeguard the future of the sector?
So the sector needs financial support from government through this transformation and recovery and they need a fund to be able to do that until that parent demand increases. So the additional funding needs to support infrastructure costs as well, and we've been calling for that. So that's for the staffing. Nursery employers want to take on apprenticeships, but they find it very difficult because it's an extra body. They can't put them in the ratio straight away. So they need all that whole financial support from government, and it'd be great if government could give 6 months financial support to support them to get apprentices whilst they were in that probationary period, fund all that through for them. So they're very keen on growing their own, but they just do need that support. The hourly rate as well is a massive issue. It doesn't cover the true cost of delivery, and with less children and more overheads, because they've got to have more staff for to manage the group system. Of course, they're just absolutely petrified that the businesses aren't going to survive.
So what you're really saying there, Stella, is a real willingness by this sector to want to take people on, and we're going to speak in a minute to Emily, and really train them. But the bottom line is the government need to understand the time that takes and the investment and we've just been talking there about things like apprenticeship guarantees, but actually, how much the levy is impacted the childcare sector, and really actually what you'd be looking for more than anything, I suspect, is some flexibility, even where there are some childcare providers paying the levy. Of course, a lot of them won't be, because they won't even won't even fall in that category, will they?
No. There's only about 68% of provision that are single site providers, small single loan businesses that need that support financially.
And yet are providing an incredibly, incredibly vital service, not just through this particular crisis, but all year long. So let me bring in Emily now. Emily, sort of well done you. I mean, you've been carrying on flying the flag for the sector. You've been working throughout this period because you've been providing a very important service to those key workers. So I'm sure very much been appreciated. But just give the audience tonight a sense of what have been your main challenges while you've been working during the lockdown period.
Well, first of all, thank you for that. Yeah, it's been hard for everyone, but in terms of work at the moment, I think it's just the child has always been the main focus whenever you work in the early years sector. So obviously the children, it's when they sense that change, it's trying to give them an understanding of it's the why, and explaining like little things like why they might not be in the same group with their friends, or why they can't sit on the same table as their friends due to social distancing. And it's just thinking about how we as practitioners can explain these things in like a learning but fun way.
And explaining them as well to very young, like you say, very young children. Yeah. I mean, wow, that must take incredible expertise. Tell us a little bit about how you've done that.
We do like little activities. So we've done things like the soap and pepper test, to learn about germs, and we bring in like books and songs that we use at nursery. So it's kind of adapting with the things that they know and the things that they've learned already, but just trying to bring that into the current situation. We're trying to normalise it as much as we can as well.
And how do you think, how are the children that you've been looking after, how have they been reacting, generally speaking? Do you think there's going to be any long-term impact on children who are sort of now getting used to this idea of you don't hug anybody, or you don't sit close with them, or do you think they'll get over it because kids do bounce back?
I think at the moment, I mean, children are quite resilient, but the fact that, like, for our children, seeing the same faces with it's that key worker bond as well. So I think at the moment it's kind of, they've gotten used to the way things are at the moment. But I think personally, children are quite resilient. I think a lot of them will just bounce back, and it'll only make them stronger.
Yeah, no, that's true, and prepare them for other pandemics and other things that will happen inevitably at some point in the future. So what have been the challenges for you as an apprentice? Because, of course, you are an apprentice, and sounds like you've been doing some great things and getting some great experience. But how has it impacted on your actual apprenticeship? Has it slowed you down in any way, or do you think it will have accelerated your own learning?
At the moment, I think if I was still doing my exams and things like that, it'd be quite hard because I think I'd need that face-to-face tutoring and stuff like that. But I think this whole situation, the whole pandemic, made me stronger as a practitioner, reflecting on the things that I've done more deeply in practice, and thinking about why we do things, and management and the smaller team that I've had at the moment at work have been just amazing as we've all put together.
Great.
Like, adapting to new situations.
So you've really had the opportunity to really, really do your on the job and your practical experience, and I think that's great.
Definitely.
And I think actually, Stella, I may come back to you on that point. I mean, you know, what would be your comment about the skills that Emily is actually being able to learn through this period? And do you think it's going to change some of the skills that may come into childcare for the future?
I mean, obviously, childcare is a really committed career, and staff are really well skilled in terms of things like hygiene, cross-infection, all the things that they learn through the qualification. So, you know, that whole reflection that Emily's been doing is absolutely fantastic, because it's given her a chance to embed all that learning that she's had. It sounds like, you know, that her employer is absolutely amazing and working really well and hard with her. In terms of, you know, I think there's a lot of things that might be a little bit different for them. They need to be more vigilant as practitioners and observant. They need to make sure that they're recognising the signs and symptoms of COVID and what to do. And, you know, and I think a lot of it is their own health and well-being, and they need to be able to look after their own health and well-being through these unprecedented times. And I just want to say what a great job they've done for the sector, supporting those key workers, and well done from our hearts at NDNA.
Well, exactly, and I think that's very well said, because last week we stopped clapping for the NHS, but perhaps we should give you one extra clap tonight, Emily, for everything that you've been doing and your colleagues as you've continued to support those important key workers. And I think we are out of time, but fantastic to have you both on this evening. Thank you for joining us, and thank you for letting us illuminate what is an incredible important contribution right now, but more importantly to the ongoing productivity of our workforce as we come out of COVID and finally recover one day. So thank you, and good luck, Emily, with the apprenticeship. Wish you all the best.
Very much.
Tom,
thank you.
Thanks, Kirstie. And absolutely, key workers, they've done a fantastic job along with so many other key workers throughout this crisis. And in fact, when you listen back to the show, I'm just going to play them now, a round of applause, which you'll be able to hear when you go to playback. And that's for you guys. Kirstie, I'm glad you signed up as well when we move to the weekly live format of the show from next Thursday. Look forward to getting your hashtag Stand Up for Skills back on the programme. See ya.
See you then. Take care. Thank you.
You're listening to Skills World Live with Tom Bewick. So that brings us to the end of tonight's penultimate show before we move, as I was just saying there, to the weekly live format next Thursday. Hold on to your handkerchiefs though, because we're not going very far. The successful format of topical debate, great expert guests like the ones you've heard this evening, and of course, hashtag FE Workout House music will continue into the future. All packed though into one weekly show. I'm talking to the editor, Gavin O'Mara, about perhaps extending it by a few minutes or so we really can get everybody's viewpoints in. So join us for the final live show of the dailies tomorrow, when we'll be in celebratory mode, reflecting back with our guests on the many issues we've covered during the lockdown. Don't forget as well, we've got that exclusive interview with the Skills Minister for England, Gillian Keegan. Thanks to Gavin O'Mara, the show's editor, Sue Primo, and of course, our digital producer, Ellie Hampson, who is already adjusting to life on Twitter, I'm told, without so many Skills World tweets to send or to receive. Skills World Live is an FE News production, supported by the Federation of Awarding Bodies Platinum Partners Programme. I'm going to play out now with this rather stripped-down techno track. It's called Bulky by LF. Goodbye. Subscribe to Skills World Live at fenews.co.uk/skillsworld.